Hi, I hope this finds you well. God's been talking to me about something rather unusual for me, and that's our legacy of prayer and what our legacy will be, what my legacy will be. And the reason this chain of thought started was I was reading something about Corrie ten Boom's grandfather, Wilhelm, and he had read in 1844 Psalm 122, verse 6, which said, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure." And the verse evidently really jumped out at him, and he felt very strongly that he needed to start praying for peace in Jerusalem and for the Jewish people, which back in those days was something kind of unusual, really, because Jewish people at that time didn't have their own state. They were living scattered all around the world and often in very difficult circumstances. But he mobilised his church in Harlem and his family to start praying faithfully for the Jewish nation. And this continued, and back in those days, evidently prayer meetings weren't a big thing. So it was kind of unusual for the church to join together as well. So he obviously didn't see an answer to those prayers in his lifetime, but he carried on, or the legacy of that prayer carried on to his son Caspar, who passed it on to his children and his children's children, until 100 years later, during the Second World War, the Ten Boom family became very involved in the answer to those prayers, and that was because in 1941 they started to help the Jewish people who were forced to go on the transport to concentration camps. 80 people found a hiding place for some days, weeks and months with the Ten Boom family. 800 people were helped with ration coupons, new identification papers, etc. And then the ultimate sacrifice in that, in doing that, was that the Ten Boom family were taken to prison themselves, and a few months later they were taken to the concentration camps, where 4 of them died as a result of their love and compassion that they had got for Jewish people. And that was the legacy of the grandfather that had been passed on down through generations. And of course, then in 1948, just over 100 years after they'd started praying, the State of Israel was declared. And it just really got me to thinking, you know what, I don't know about you, but sometimes we get a bit caught up with our smaller prayers. We get caught up in our circumstances, but it's, what are we looking to? What is the bigger picture? And when I was doing a little bit of a study on this, I looked at people in the Bible and their legacy that they left to future generations, in particular with regards to praying and their relationship with God and how they talked to God and what they were praying for. So, Moses passed the baton on to Joshua. Elijah passed his legacy on to Elisha. But then when you look at Jesus, he spent his time with the disciples, preparing them and teaching them in their prayer life, in how to pray and how to pray the big prayers, which was going to be needed for what they were being called to do after he had left them and gone back to heaven. And he taught them, the Lord's Prayer. He taught them how to pray. He was an example. He taught them how to pray for people. He taught them how to withdraw to the private place, to pray privately. He admonished them, that when they didn't stay awake with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, to pray at the hardest time in his life. They had first-hand experience of being taught by the Master. And wow, what happened then? What did he leave them with? And what did they achieve after through those lessons? And so I guess just a couple of things is, our first point of call with leaving a legacy is with our families. And even for those of us whose children might not be necessarily leading a full prayer life, what is it that they hear from you that will influence them? So when there's an issue in the family, what's your first response? Panic? Or is it, I'm going to pray about that. God's going to sort that. I've got the faith for that. God can do that. We're going to pray. When something good happens, what's your first response? Even if it's just, thank you, God. Peter, his shortest prayer was, God help me, Jesus help me, when he started to sink, when he was walking on the water. Those short bullet prayers. But also, what are we praying for in the bigger realms that we can pass on not only to our families, but to the people that are within our sphere of influence? I know there are people in our church whose passion is to see the eradication of homelessness, and they are passing that passion on, those fervent prayers on to other people and to future generations. What is it that God has laid heavily on your heart? What is it that God has commanded you to pray for that maybe is outside of the boundary of your immediate circumstances? It could be things like, has God given you a nation to pray for? Has God given you something specific, like, people on the peripheries of society, whatever that looks like? Is it young people? Is it children? Is it families? What is it that God has given you a passion for? And who are you passing that legacy onto to continue, so that even if you don't see the answers in your lifetime, those prayers continue. The doors of heaven are being battered on the behalf of those people, of those nations that God has asked you to pray for. Bit of a big question. I'll leave it with you there. Have a good day.